Linda, there were a group of young people that were part of this culture that said, okay, and they got the purity rings, they made the purity pledges.
Yeah.
And they, for some story of life, they weren't able to keep it, whatever that means. Then there was another group of people that made these pledges, actually kept it. And then both of these groups found themselves in romantic relationships,
Yeah.
whether they were the ones who didn't keep it and whether the ones who did.
Yeah.
Talk about then the consequences that both experienced, whether they kept the pledge or not kept the pledge. And I refer back to something you said at the start of this whole idea of now we turn on our sexuality. Mm-hmm. We're now free to go. Yeah. And now let's turn it on. But we had these years of whether we kept the pledge or didn't.
Yeah.
Talk about the impact and the effects that it's taken its toll on people.
Well, it's interesting because that was one of my first questions that I came to this with, because growing up in the purity movement, you learned that you were going to have a horrible life if you broke the pledge or whatever you want to say, right?
Right.
So here I was as somebody who was breaking the pledge, as it were, or attempting to break the pledge, but incapable of actually breaking it due to a tremendous amount of shame. But anyway, who was really actively doing what she wasn't supposed to be doing. Yeah. And I was having all these experiences. And so a part of me, of course, was asking the question, was the church right? Am I having these experiences because I didn't do what I'm supposed to have done, right? And so as I mentioned, I've been doing interviews for 16 years. And they've been really around the country and around the world. But the first year was the beginning, right? The first year was in my mid-20s. I went back to my hometown and I called up all of the young women in their 20s who I could get a hold of, who had been raised in my youth group. And I interviewed them over the course of a year about what their lives looked like now that they were in their 20s, having grown up within the purity movement. And what was really shocking to me, and one of the big questions that I was coming to that year of interviews with, was, is there going to be a difference between the people who broke the pledge like me, who were tempted to break the pledge like me, and people who didn't? And what I found was that the shame, the fear, the anxiety was in both groups. Whereas I was taking pregnancy tests, though I wasn't having sex, but I was getting close enough that a part of me was like, that punishment, that promised punishment, it's coming. Meanwhile, my friend who had done everything the way that she was supposed to had gone to an even more conservative evangelical college than our church, had become a professor at that college, had really gone deep, had gotten married. He had been her, first sexual partner. She was experiencing a very similar amount of shame and fear around her sexual life with her husband. And I remember the day that I was helping her search her home for recording devices, because a part of her was afraid that she was being recorded. That was the moment that I was like,
wow,
we are both having extreme fear to the point where, I knew I wasn't pregnant deep down, but I couldn't keep myself from taking those tests. She knew she wasn't being recorded deep down, but she couldn't keep herself from searching for those recording devices, because we were both in such a state of anxious fear that we needed something to be able to sleep at night.
That's right.
Some reassurance that the sky wasn't about to fall.
Yeah.
And we had taken completely different paths. So really that friend was the first friend that opened my eyes to, it didn't matter what choices you made, and then I found more and more people who had kept the pledge and who were having the same experiences. So lots of variation, of course, among the experiences that people had, but what indicated what type of experience you were going to have was not the choices that you had made.
Yes. And I think, and these are my choice of words and not necessarily great. So whether one did it right or whether one did it wrong, and we even know that's not the perspective, but whether one did it right or wrong, they still ended up with the same lump of
Yep.
shame. And I would say, as a minister for the past 25, 30 years, in counseling people, I would say that concurs with my just counseling with people. And then, I think my wife and I, being raised in that culture and then being agents in it for a time in the 90s, it would concur with our experience.